Singapore. Your business day in Southeast Asia starts right now, and here are your headlines.
Today, the SEC filed securities fraud charges against Elon Musk.
Tesla founder in trouble over claims about taking the company private. The stock plummets almost 14% in after-hours trading.
And Mr. Trump's trade war not quite reaching Washington's goals to reduce its trade deficits. Quite the opposite, really. The U.S. trade deficit last month hit a 6-month high as exports of food, industrial supplies, and autos fell.
Reports say Malaysian telco giant Axiata may reject an offer for its stake in the Singapore telco operator M1. Shares of M1, Singapore Press Holdings and Keppel Corp eyed as their request for the suspension to be lifted today.
And plus, Indonesia's biggest ever foreign divestment gets a thumbs down from investors. Freeport shares fall in New York after the company signs a deal to cede majority control of its Grasberg mine.
Well, happy Friday, folks, and welcome to the show. Here we are at the end of another busy week in business and politics. It's absolutely incredible how the weeks fly. But before you hang up your coat and enjoy the weekend, Julie and I certainly have a lot to update you on this edition of Asia Business First.
That's right. Coming up on the show, the impacts of automation on jobs.
To make sure we educate people, that we develop and build the skills so that the masses can be included in this future economy.
On C-Suite, I speak to Johan de Villiers, Managing Director of Southeast Asia at ABB.
It's in vessels like the ones behind me where hand-lined fishermen live for weeks to months at a time out on the deep sea to fish for sashimi-grade tuna.
A ground report from General Santos City in the Philippines on how overfishing and other unsustainable practices have affected the lives of fishermen. We're going to get to one of our big stories today, Julian. Of course, Elon Musk in hot suit once again. The U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission is suing Elon Musk for misleading investors over his claims about taking the company he founded, Tesla, private. Now, the SEC accuses Musk of making a series of false and misleading statements back in August. That's when he tweeted that he was virtually certain he could take the company private if he wanted to. Now, Musk said he was confident funding for the deal would come through from a Saudi wealth fund. He later withdrew the idea, but not before Tesla's shares had rallied and then fallen back.
Statements misled members of the investing public to believe that it was virtually certain he could take Tesla private at a price of $420 per share, which was a substantial premium over its share price at that time, because funding for this proposed transaction had been secured.
While leading Tesla's investors to believe that he had a firm offer in hand, we alleged that Musk had arrived at the price of $420 by assuming a 20% premium over Tesla's then existing share price, and then rounding up to $420 because of the significance of that number in marijuana culture and his belief that his girlfriend would be amused by it.
Well, in a statement, Musk described the fraud charges as unjustified, saying he was saddened and disappointed. He went on to say that he had always acted in the best interests of truth, transparency, and investors, and the facts will show that he never compromised on any of these. Well, even before the tweets, the SEC was investigating issues at Tesla, including its car sales projections. In the meantime, investors, they didn't like it at all. The stock getting pummeled in overnight trade, particularly in the after hours. You can see slamming down almost 14% on news against Musk about those charges.
Thanks, Adam. Well, U.S. President Donald Trump's trade war is beginning to bite on the U.S. economy. Trade deficit last month hit a 6-month high. For more on this, I'm joined by Mary McCarthy from Los Angeles. Now, Mary, President Trump must not be too pleased to see numbers like these when he's trying to reduce the deficit.
Absolutely. And let's look at some of those numbers. The World Trade Organization, in its latest report, has slashed the outlook for global trade commerce, saying that this year they have lowered the rate of growth to 3.9%. Prediction for next year, 3.7% trade growth. That compares to 4.7% last year. It's placing the blame for that slowdown in trade growth squarely on the tension caused by the trade war. And those numbers from the WTO are really in line with what we're seeing elsewhere. For example, the logistics and transport company DHL said that its trade barometer has dropped to its lowest since 2016. It predicts slower growth in the coming months. And then also it's in line with numbers we're seeing from the U.S. Commerce Department, where it has said today that the trade deficit, that's the merchandise trade deficit, has reached nearly $76 billion. That's close to a record. That includes a decline in U.S. exports of food, also industrial supplies and automobiles. So yes, not exactly what President Trump is hoping for. It does come, however, as the U.S. Central Bank is still saying that from their perspective, things are looking rosy, and saying that so far from their perspective, they see the trade war as not having a detectable effect on the broader data.
All right, Mary, thank you very much for breaking down those numbers for us.
Right now, for the pulse check on how the markets are doing on this Friday morning against the backdrop of all those trade tensions. Overnight, actually, we saw sentiment improve across U.S. equities. Stocks climbed after the Fed cited a strong economy, and it raised, of course, the interest rate for the third time this year, flagged another one possibly by December, and 3 more next year. Well, here in Asia, we're picking up the baton from a positive lead on Wall Street, and you can see we're running with that. Tokyo is up currently by 1% in trade there. We've got the Kospi, though, moving in the opposite direction this morning, and the Straits Times Index currently up by around 0.5% to be one of the best performing in Southeast Asia. Of course, the big news is the fact that we have consolidation happening in the telco sector. I believe M1 shares are all back to trade today, so we're going to be keeping a watch out for the market reactions. I believe M1 is skyrocketing 28%. Keppel Corp and Singapore Press Holdings also requesting for that trading halt to be lifted, pending, of course, that announcement yesterday that they wanted to take out all the rest of the shares they do not already own. So we'll be getting you those numbers shortly. But before that, let's do a quick check on how the currency markets are faring on this Friday morning, because overnight, on the acknowledgement of what Jerome Powell said the previous day and the strength in the U.S. economy and the further rate rises, investors took that comment and ran with it, pushing the dollar up to the highest or the strongest gains we've seen in about a couple of weeks, coming very close to the 94 handle, the DXY, which measures the greenback against a basket of 6 other major currencies, which includes the euro. And we're also seeing it gain against the Japanese yen, which is, of course, good for Japan. Now, Argentina, in the meantime, that currency, the peso, is weakening after the country won a promise of extra cash from the IMF. So really a big casualty in the emerging market space. And continuing to talk about emerging markets, we had rate decisions here in Southeast Asia yesterday, both from the Philippines and Indonesia. Checking in on how those local currencies are doing, the Philippine peso currently is moving back lower versus the US dollar. The Indonesian rupiah had actually strengthened. At the moment, we're seeing the dollar bounce back, but post those rate decisions yesterday, both these local currencies had actually strengthened mildly on the back of those moves. So stabilization can be seen. Now, the central bank did this to stem inflation in the Philippines and provide some support to the peso. In Indonesia, the central bank too raised its benchmark interest rates for the 5th time since middle of May. The rupiah had stabilized, as I showed you, and strengthened mildly against the greenback. Notwithstanding, of course, those recoveries in the local currencies since those rate hikes yesterday, EM currencies have certainly been very, very fragile in 2018. From the start of the year to now, it took the Indonesian rupiah just a mere 8 months to hit lows against the US dollar. And these are levels not seen since the Asian financial crisis in 1997, so 20 years ago. In fact, the fact that, of course, it breached the psychological crucial level of 15,000 earlier this month, in fact, on September the 4th, threw the government and the central bank into damage control mode with all sorts of measures to contain the fall. Though it can be argued that Indonesia's economy is much firmer than back in the 1990s. Yet the authorities are leaving nothing to chance. Take a look at some of the measures implemented by the government alone, starting with higher taxes from caviar to ceramics, chocolates, cars, and even swimwear. Jakarta has targeted all it could with higher taxes to rein in that ballooning trade deficit. deficit and, of course, support the ailing rupiah. All in all, 1,147 goods will sport a higher levy. And in some cases, the taxes were slapped on goods that already come with a high import duty, as much as 150%. Well, raw materials will get away lightly, as making them expensive to import could in turn make the goods that they help produce extremely expensive. So the tariffs on them is kept at 2.5%. Others, though, well, they don't get off lightly. Most imported consumer goods will be taxed at a rate of 10%, and that's up from an existing 2.5% to 7.5% levy that Jakarta had when we started September. Now, products that can be made domestically, ranging from soaps to shampoos and kitchen appliances, will also be taxed at a rate of 10%. And other imported items such as ceramics, audio speakers and swimwear will sport a levy of around 7.5%. But luxury items are going to get even more expensive. Luxury cars, for one, will also be taxed at a rate of 10%. And it's the end of the road for cars with an engine capacity of 3,000 cc's, at least for now, in Indonesia, as the government will stop issuing import permits for them within this month. All this intended to not just rein in the deficit, but to also give local producers a chance to penetrate the domestic market, because they face stiff competition from imported goods, obviously. Now, to give you a sense of just how much Indonesia imports, just consumer goods produced overseas surged more than 50% in the month of July and August. Now they say, you've heard this saying, all is fair in love and war, and this is the country's war against a depreciating currency. Yet the Indonesian trade minister clarified that these new taxes do not breach free trade rules set by the World Trade Organization. Now, to balance it all, taxes on items that the country ships from outside isn't going to help fill the deficit gap alone, which is why the government is also making attempts to raise overseas demand for its own products. In order to achieve that, Jakarta has relaxed rules on export of coal and also palm oil, among others. Now, apart from taxes, one other key step that the government took was to delay $25 billion in power projects. And that's going to save the government about $8 to $10 billion in import costs. Well, apart from that, Indonesia, which is the biggest oil producer here in Southeast Asia, has asked all of these contractors in the country to sell their output to the state oil and gas from Pertamina to curb its imports. According to Pertamina's CEO, this could save the company from shipping costs of 60%. Well, of course, we'll keep keeping an eye on how the Indonesian rupiah trades throughout today's trading session, given that, of course, the greenback rose in yesterday's trading session. So far, so good, as all these measures adopted by the Indonesian government are doing some part or going in some way to stem the declines in the rupiah. Whether it reaches at 15,000 is anybody's guess. Right, still ahead on the program. After months of wrangling, Freeport McMoran seals a pact with Indonesia on the Grasberg mine, but its shares fell in trade. So there's a little bit of uncertainty as to whether this deal will get done. Stay with us on Asia Business First.
In Hong Kong, the impossible quest for property doesn't end when you die.
This year, the government estimates that some 50,000 Hong Kongers are going to die, but it only has 855 new earn spaces.
And that's created a backlog of the dead without a place to go. What happens when a city runs out of space for people to die? Join me, Wei Du, for this Correspondent's Diary special tonight on Channel News Asia.
Be in the know when it happens, as it happens.
Welcome to News Now.
With more live reports, in-depth analysis, hour-on-hour financial updates, and business news. News Now takes on a brand new look. We're doubling our coverage so you'll be kept in the know. All the latest breaking news headlines from across Asia and around the world. Exclusively on Channel News Asia. This October, investigate trends that are changing society and our lives. Algorithms, how they rule our world. Are codes taking over people's right to decide? For food's sake, how world events are causing everyday dishes to eat up a bigger chunk of our expenses. Can price hikes be prevented? Cram Course Asia, schools that offer unusual classes for a brighter future. and are no less intensive. This October on Channel News Asia.
This Saturday, the US-China trade war has turned ugly. What are the implications for stocks, currencies, and commodities for the rest of 2018?
If the Americans go all the way, that would bring down the US market.
It feels as though we're turning the corner here on China.
The oil market is bracing for further spikes.
Money Mind, Saturday on Channel News Asia.
Welcome back to the program. Well, the 9-year saga over Grasberg mine in Indonesia, the world's second biggest copper mine, may be at an end, or maybe not. Now,
Their agenda is not necessarily just the president's agenda. A reported a story today at Politico about the people who are handing Trump stories. Sometimes they're true, sometimes they're false, and having an impact to give themselves an edge in the internal staff jockeying wars, to give an edge on policy decisions. He's driven very much by information he receives. And so for all of these staff, there's a great interest in using the press. Again, Donald Trump is a huge consumer of the media. He wakes up in the morning and he's watching Fox.
Well, Saiful Bari Ismail joins us live from Jakarta this morning. And Saiful, on paper, it looks, well, like a done deal. But what are the outstanding issues to clear it over those hurdles?
Well, Adam, the outstanding issue is that payment has not yet been made. To conclude the deal, which is a binding agreement, PT Indonesia Asahan Aluminium, or Inalum, which represents the government in the talks, needs to settle the payment of $3.85 billion, the Freeport and Rio Tinto Group, within 6 months. Now, Freeport Chief Executive Richard Atkinson also said that while the agreement is definitive, it still will need to be approved by antitrust agencies across the world. This is because Freeport is an international company that needs to get permits from a jurisdiction beyond the U.S. Now, with regards to how the payment will be made, Inalum has said that it will probably get the funds from foreign syndicated bank loans. And the company added that it could transfer the money as soon as November. The Freeport deal will also be likely to be politicized. Now, observers said it could be used for the campaigns of both President Joko Widodo and his contender Prabowo Subianto ahead of next year's presidential election. Now, Mr. Widodo will probably use it as productive campaign material, saying that he has managed to gain control over a foreign investor, while the opposition will likely criticize the funding issue.
Saiful, thank you very much. Saiful Bari Ismail in Jakarta for us. Now, casting spotlight on India's shadow banking crisis, the country's central bank has canceled a meeting which was scheduled today with the stakeholders of the embattled IL&FS Group.
Now, this company had rattled the local credit market last week after it missed those debt payments.
That's right. The IL&FS holds its annual general meeting tomorrow. It has about $500 million of repayment obligations over the next 6 months. Its debts stand at over $12 billion.
Well, the company's shareholders include India's largest insurer, Life Insurance Corporation, and the biggest lender, State Bank of India, and also Japan's Oryx Corporation. The repayment crisis has stoked borrowing costs in India's credit markets. The average yield on one-year corporate notes have jumped to the highest levels since 2015. All this has raised questions about the affordability of some of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's infrastructure projects.
It includes awarding works of around 20,000 kilometers of national highways and ring roads in 28 major cities this financial year. Investors are also worried about leverage at other shadow banks, and that has prompted a surge in volatility among financial stocks.
Well, checking in on how the markets did in the trading session was another tough session for Indian stocks, down 2 days in a row. A lot of concerns about the market as the government had increased import duties on selected goods. And the Reserve Bank of India announced measures to ease liquidity concerns on the back of the credit squeeze that we're seeing in the non-bank financial space. And in fact, shares of Yes Bank and some of the other financial institutions fell very heavily, about 9%, in fact, respectively, as we saw the plague in the credit space play out in financial markets. In the meantime, You're looking at the currency there. The dollar index is receding a little bit versus the Indian rupee. Currently, of course, next week is going to be a big week as we will be awaiting the Reserve Bank of India's decision on interest rates as other emerging market central banks with fragile currencies have come under pressure to tighten monetary policy. Right, time for another break on the program. Still to come on Asia Business First.
You've got to solve a problem somewhere. You've got to make something better with the technology that you use.
Words of advice for countries to adopt new technology to meet their power demands. My interview with the regional head of ABB coming up next.
Any cancers that occurs in the reproductive organ is considered as a gynecologic cancer. The commonest ones being uterine cancer, ovarian cancer, and cervical cancer. Uterine cancer usually presents with unusual menstrual bleeding. In the early stages, ovarian cancer has no symptoms. Be aware that low abdominal bloating, discomfort, constipation, generally poor appetite, all these are potential symptoms of ovarian cancer. Of all the gynecologic cancers, cervical cancer is about the most preventable. For ladies, as we grow older, we do get more susceptible to cancers. So a lady needs to go for regular screening if they are younger than 35 for pap smearing. Before they're 18, it would be good for them to get HPV vaccination.
They analyse crime patterns, predict where it will happen, and help to patrol dangerous neighbourhoods. They are the new face of law enforcement.
Comprehensive and contextual.
And we're tracking the top news stories across Asia.
Examine top news events from different angles and understand the implications from politics, social issues, tech innovations, sports and business.
Has issued a warning.
Get a roundup with expert analysis.
Help us understand.
And connect with Asia's widest network of correspondents.
Also closure of schools.
Right from the newsroom.
We'll have an update on that.
Prime Time Asia, daily on Channel News Asia.
Him, all for the sake of power. There was zero presumption of innocence here or due process. Now the Democratic Party, every 2-4 years, every time we have a nomination in the Supreme Court, we know what to expect. The party of slander, besmirchment, smears, character assassination,
is a major
the party of no due
for
process, no presumption of innocence, the party that rushes to judgment. Look at all the high-profile cases. Rush to judgment. Duke lacrosse case, the Cambridge Police acted stupidly, Ferguson, Missouri, Baltimore, Maryland, Richard Jewell, Trayvon Martin.
Well, digitalization is an absolutely key enabler of future technology and a more sustainable energy future. And maybe the best way to answer that is to give you a few examples of what we do. The biggest consumer of electricity and determining the efficiency of those plants are often how the boilers and the turbines are controlled and how the control systems operate in these plants. And over time, that can deteriorate. And today we have digital technology that can connect to these plants. And then you can have specialists somewhere in a central location that can monitor many different sites, even across continents, and look at the performance between these different plants and look at the performance of the control systems and optimize this in real time to make sure these plants continue to perform in the most efficient way.
But digitalization is often perceived as tactical or short-term and even expensive. How would you address these concerns?
I think you have to take a pragmatic approach. There has been a lot of hype in this whole discussion around digitalization, and we take a very pragmatic approach. You've got to solve a problem somewhere. You've got to make something better with the technology that you use. So I think we don't advocate this one-size-fits-all, one big step, and then you're digitalized, but to rather build this in smaller blocks as is appropriate for your own operation. And then it covers very large industrial customers right down to very small factories that can make a step and improve their operations.
And not only energy, but ABB have also been encompassing a wide range of tech business like robotics and automation for manufacturing. How would you address concerns that these intelligent machines would replace manufacturing jobs?
We always have to caution to make sure that we remain inclusive, and that is, the topic I think that's very important for governments, and we see a role to play there to make sure we educate people, that we develop and build the skills so that the masses can be included in this future economy. But if you look around the world, the countries that have adopted automation, and specifically robotics, and where you see the highest densities, are also the most productive countries. They are countries that provide high quality product, and they have the lowest unemployment rates. So I think the future, as we see it, is collaborative. It's where man works together with machines. And that's the direction you see robotics developing, but also with artificial intelligence and some of the digital technologies.
I understand that ABB is betting big on connected vehicles and smart cities. Now, what products or services are you leveraging on for this vision?
Well, electric mobility is a very big topic and very important, and one that we're very passionate about. So we're at the moment the world's largest seller of electric fast charging equipment, and very great to see that come to Southeast Asia as well. Of course, the cars need to be developed and need to be available. You see this coming to bus transport as well. So there's also some interesting projects where we start electrifying buses in city centers. And what excites me is this is bringing a more sustainable future. This is really helping us grow our economies in a more sustainable way and without consuming the earth. And as an electric car user, I'm very happy to see this happening.
Still to come on Asia Business First, the plot thickens as Singapore Telecom M1's suitors face the possibility of a rejection.
And we're seeing that play out in the markets there. M1 is up by almost 28%. Keppel Corp shares down on the prospect that it might have to increase its bid. Who knows? Meantime, Axiata shares under pressure with the uncertainty on whether this deal will go ahead.
There's a very real energy in the country, a sense that now, more than ever, we have to reinvent ourselves for the future.
Singapore Tonight keeps you up to date with this rapid and relentless, really, pace of development.
So every night we give you a wrap of the day's happenings, but it's more than just reports on government policies and business numbers.
What our seasoned journalists do is that they shed light on the issues that you really care about, because we speak to the newsmakers who are going to help you to better understand events that are changing our world. But not only that, how they're changing the lives of ordinary people, people like you and me, and helping us make informed decisions that could perhaps change the way we live.
Viewers can expect a fresh new look, fresh new perspectives on the issues, as well as exciting new digital elements that have never been seen before on Singapore News.
I'm in Bangkok, a city known for its cuisine. But scratch beneath the surface,
He literally just pushes himself out.
and you can find ingredients that you never would have imagined.
Oh my god, it's like coming.
So join me for my wild twist on traditional Thai dishes. Edible Wild, City Trails, Saturday on Channel News Asia. Biodiversity is booming, which is inviting for some local foragers and farmers who embrace edible wildlife.
We're the largest organic banana grower in Singapore.
This is jam.
Amazing! So the mulberries are from the garden.
No, that's delicious.
Singapore is ramping up conservation efforts locally and across the region.
I really do love reptiles and finding out about them, so I really love my job.
Building must relate to the lives of the people.
目前还是一直要创新一些新的东西，我也不希望是人家把我看作是80岁的人。
There are those who dare to be different, who have made their mark in Singapore and beyond.
You have such big dreams, you want to change the world with your art.
Obviously, every fighter wants to win, so all you can do is to prepare yourself to win.
Good morning and welcome back to Asia Business First. A quick check on our top stories this hour.
Well, M1 shares are surging more than 28%, but Keppel Corp is sinking currently by 2.2%. Reports say the Malaysian telco Axiata may reject an offer for its stake in the operator of telcos M1.
Today, the SEC filed securities fraud charges against Elon Musk.
Tesla's founder in trouble over claims about taking the company private. The stock plummets in after-hours trading.
Mr. Trump's trade war not quite reaching Washington's goals to reduce its trade deficits. Quite the opposite, in fact. The U.S. trade deficit last month hits a 6-month high as exports of food, industrial supplies and autos fell.
Indonesia's biggest ever foreign divestment gets a thumbs down from investors. Freeport shares fall in New York after the company signs a deal to seize majority control of its Grasberg mine.
Well, now to the big story of the day here in Singapore, Julie, that we've been following, and that is consolidation in the telco space, which is shaken up by an offer from two heavyweights, Singapore Press Holdings and Keppel Corp, which is owned by Temasek, to buy up the stock that they don't already own in M1, which is the third largest telco here in Singapore, from Axiata, which is a Malaysian company. Now, the strike price of that potential deal was $2.06 per share, and that was announced yesterday. And as you can see, M1 shares have rallied on the resumption of trade this morning. We're seeing the stock rally by 28% as all the companies requested for the trading halt to be lifted, and they were suspended about a couple of days yesterday, in fact. SPH and Keppel also resuming trade today. SPH are currently up by 1.4%, and if the scheme goes through, their 13% stake will end up with about a 16% stake in M1, assuming it goes through. Keppel shares, though, under pressure this morning, down by 2.2%. As there is talk outside that perhaps Axiata might push back on the valuations there. But in Malaysia, checking in on Axiata shares, they continue to be down in the trading session. Bear in mind, a couple of days ago, the stock had rallied about 4.7% just before the stock suspensions in the Singapore companies. And there is talk that Axiata might want a better offer for their shares in M1. Axiata is M1's biggest shareholder with a current stake of 28.7%. It didn't say outright that it would reject the offer, but it did say that its position was clear that the offer must reflect M1's future value. Now, Reuters report, citing people with direct knowledge of the matter, says that Axiata is likely to reject the bid, which values M1 at $1.4 billion US, or that's about 1.6 billion Singapore dollars. Now, yesterday, Singapore Press Holdings joined Keppel Corp in offering to buy shares that they don't already own in M1 at that offer price of $2.06 per share. Analysts say that the move will allow SPH and Keppel to gain a majority control of M1 and subsequently drive business changes that will enable the telco to compete more effectively. Brandon Tenoto has more.
With an offer price that's 26% higher than M1's last closing price of $1.63 on Friday, market watchers are calling it attractive.
That's generally how these takeovers happen. They have to have some incentive for the owners or for the owners of the company to give up their equity.
Is attractive in our view. There's press out there right now that Axiata is looking to better that offer, so even more attractive.
But for shareholders who have bought M1 shares at a higher price, Mr. Hilado says they're going to feel that the offer is undervalued. M1 shares have plunged almost 60% since its March 2015 high.
It's going to give them a lot deeper pockets to compete even in the domestic landscape. For instance, whether they come out with significant discounts to compete against Singtel.
Now, Singapore's telcos have come under pressure over the past 2 years, and this is mainly due to an expected increase in competition amid the entrance of a fourth telco player, which is Australian-based TPG Telecom.
TPG is sort of the dark horse. It's not quite sure yet what their strategy will be. So that uncertain environment is what is capping the upside of all the telcos. Part of the initiative to privatize it is to make it more nimble and also to give the option to the current minorities to exit, because there may be some painful times ahead in order to execute that strategy. The Keppel Group as well as SPH has basically said that dividends may be at risk, because earnings, of course, will be at risk once competition intensifies.
This is not the first time that Keppel and SPH considered a possible transaction with regards to its interest in M1. Back in March of last year, Keppel TNT, Singapore Press Holdings and Malaysian telco Axiata had considered a possible sale. Axiata is the biggest shareholder among the three, owning a 28.7% stake, followed by Keppel TNT's 19.3% and SPH's 13.5%. However, no agreement was reached and the trio decided not to proceed further with the review. Keppel says the deal will allow it to use M1 as a digital platform and connectivity partner for its business units.
But also the diversification part, getting out of the reliance on oil. We've seen them moved into some other industries, into property markets and what have you over the years. And this is just part of the diversification program as the company evolves.
And as for SPH, it says the deal will allow it to use M1's mobile platform to provide digital content. Axiata says it will continue to evaluate all options available for its stake. For now, the offer needs to be approved by the Info Communications Media Development Authority and fulfill other regulatory obligations by March 27, 2019. Trading in M1, Keppel and SPH shares .
All right, let's get a check on how the markets in the region are faring this last day of the trading week. We're seeing some mixed picture across the markets this morning following the rebound of the U.S. market as Apple led tech shares higher. Japan's Nikkei 225 jumped more than 1% thanks to that slide in the yen to the weakest level this year. Also, where Singapore's STI, as you saw there, was in the green.
Yeah, so not a bad trading session. Now time to check in on the Greater China markets to see how they are faring this morning, and also rising to the drumbeat of the rest of the Asia-Pac region. We've got mild gains across Shanghai Composite, Shenzhen, and the Hang Seng Index is currently up by about 162 points following those gains on Wall Street. Well, let's drill down on the stocks and the sectors to watch with our correspondent in Hong Kong, Roland Lim. Morning, Roland.
Adam, a rising interest rate environment may be hurting developers, but some local banks, yes, as well as insurers, are benefiting now. Hang Seng Bank, insurers AIA, Zhong'an online shares all rose in expectations that higher prime rates will actually generate higher revenues and income for these financial houses. Now, HSBC was the first bank yesterday in the territory to raise its best lending rate, first time in 12 years. The bank says effective today, it'll raise its best lending rate by 12.5 basis points to 5.125%, and that's up from 5% set all the way back in 2008. Standard Chartered and Hang Seng Bank have also raised their rates in lockstep with HSBC. Next, shares of GenScript Biotech suspended at midday trade yesterday after short seller Flaming Research accused GenScript of actually faking clinical data. Now, shares of the Chinese biotech firm tumbled 27% to $11.86 Hong Kong before the trading halt. Now, Flaming Research has set a price target of $3.29. That's less than a third of what it's currently worth. Now, it's a bit curious because local media cited a bearish report from the little-known research group that was shared on Chinese social media, even though the report hasn't been made on the group's own website. Now, both Flaming Research and GenScript have not responded to any media queries. And it's going to cost you more to fly out of Hong Kong. Cathay Pacific bringing back fuel surcharges starting from November 2nd. This after the Civil Aviation Department said that airlines can freely decide on the charge. Now, the fuel surcharge costing anywhere between $19 and $83, and that depends on your destination. Remember, losses in fuel hedging for Cathay was a major factor weighing down on its bottom lines these past few years.
All right, Roland, thanks very much. It doesn't sound too good. We're going to have to pay a little bit more for those airline tickets, for those fuel surcharges. Let's hope SQ doesn't do that as well. A bit more for those airline All right, Roland, have a good weekend. We'll see you Monday morning. Right, still ahead on Asia Business First. We're going to get to some investment strategy.
That's right. Watch out from yesterday's Fed statement, which was the catalyst for equity market gains on Wall Street. And now this morning in Asia. Tougher times getting from HG Research in just a minute. Stay with us.
In Hong Kong, the impossible quest for property doesn't end when you die.
This year, the government estimates that some 50,000 Hong Kongers are going to die, but it only has 855 new earn spaces.
And that's created a backlog of the dead without a place to go. What happens when a city runs out of space for people to die? Join me, Wei Du, for this Correspondence Diary special tonight on Channel News Asia.
Be in the know when it happens, as it happens.
Welcome to News Now.
With more live reports, in-depth analysis, hour-on-hour financial updates, and business news. News Now takes on a brand new look. We're doubling our coverage so you'll be kept in the know. All the latest breaking news headlines from across Asia and around the world. Exclusively on Channel News Asia.
For the most discerning timepiece collectors, Orient Crown, a leader in watchwinders, combines state-of-the-art technology and exquisite design to deliver luxury watchwinders and jewelry safe boxes. Explore Orient Crown at Marina Bay Sands and Takashimaya.
And some breaking news within the last few minutes now.
When news breaks,
A bomb went off in the neighboring district of Siloam. Just now.
Security has been increased.
Gives you the context of the story.
We have been listening in on a live press conference.
And provides you the full picture.
We bring you